Okay, we're more or less stable. So I start off and get us going. So thank you again for joining today. This is one of the so-called open hours that as Focal Point for Italy, we're organizing at various stages in the preparation of the new AR7 cycle of the IPCC. So it's an activity that the Italian Focal Point manages, but we will conduct this all in English because we're interested in enhancing participation in the process across the board. And of course, in Italy itself, we have many international experts. So this is the intention is to be very open and inclusive. So I'm the Focal Point alternate for Italy. I'm based at CMCC, which is the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. And with me, we have two special guests. You see Rita Nogherotto from the CNR and Giulia Ulpiani from JRC. And I'll introduce them shortly to you. Just to remark that the Focal Point for Italy with Antonio Navarro acting as Focal Point has a role to connect the scientific activities at the national scale, as well as the political and stakeholder communities to the IPCC. We also represent Italy at IPCC plenary sessions and meetings, and we do a lot of dissemination and communication, particularly when the results start coming in. And just to introduce also other colleagues who are actively supporting the process, so Marta Elena, also the communication team of CMCC, Mauro Buonocore, Marina Menga, and Agnese Glauda, who's here with us today. And you can find out more information in general from the Focal Point on our webpage, where we have regular announcements. When we have news, you can sign up to the newsletter, and we also produce some sort of outreach material, also translated in Italian. So as I said, we have two special guests, and when we nominated authors, we're very fortunate to have two authors from Italy selected. So Giulia Ulpiani, working at the Joint Research Center, she is a lead author for Chapter 3. And the chapter is about actions and solutions to reduce urban risks and emissions. And then Rita Nogherotto, who is hosted at ICTP, but I should actually have written CNR, which is the National Research Center of Italy. She is LA lead author for Chapter 5, all about solutions by city types and regions. So I'll come back to Giulia and Rita later on, because the nice thing of having them with us is that they can really explain to you what they're doing as authors and how you can support the work through the expert review process. But first of all, a very brief introduction first on the IPCC, and then I'll describe what's involved in participating in the expert review. I'll talk a little bit about what the assessment is for the IPCC, and there's some characteristics that are quite unique. And it's important to understand these, particularly the way uncertainties and confidence in the findings are communicated. And that will help you really look at the draft that is available now and contribute as effectively as possible. So first of all, you know that the IPCC is a handshake from the scientific community to the policy communities. And so to be most effective, it needs to be neutral in respect to policy choices. So you'll see that these reports must not be using prescriptive language such as, should, must, or this ought to happen, whereas it's an assessment of the literature based on scientific and technical subjects. And then this is produced with an expert assessment of confidence of the findings of the information out there for policymakers then to make those policy choices. And the other important thing to note is the IPCC is not a research body. It doesn't produce original research, nor does it produce original data sets. It's assessing the published literature that's out there. And the scientists that are involved now increasingly also not just academic scientists, but also practitioners and people with much broader expertise, but still bringing scientific, technical, and socioeconomic expertise. They will work from the publications that are out in the peer-reviewed literature, the grey literature, and increasingly also there's a move to consider much more integratively indigenous knowledge, so other forms of knowledge as well. And you may know this already, but the way in which these reports are drafted, it's an iterative process. So a first draft is produced, experts around the world are invited to review this, and this is where we're at now. And then from the comments and from the new literature that's available, the continued work of the authors, a second draft is produced. The government and experts, widely government experts as well, will review that second order draft. And from there, a final draft is developed, a final government distribution it's called, and the first iteration of the summary, or the second iteration of the summary for policymakers. And that finally makes its way to an approval session, an intergovernmental session, where the scientific representatives of the reports discuss the way the findings are presented with government representatives. And this is the final stage in this review and co-creation process of the IPCC report. So just to highlight a few key messages from the IPCC perspective, and this is thanks to Andrew Ockham and Working Group 2, these slides are intended to really emphasize some ambitions for this seventh cycle of the IPCC. So there's a real drive to talk more of information that will support implementation and activating action as a result of the information in the reports. There's a real call for more local knowledge. And clearly this is a challenge when we have a global assessment, but the challenge is to bring global frameworks or regional scale information down to something that can actually be tangibly relevant for local processes and decision making. And so this implies engaging practitioners and policymakers more strongly than ever, both public and private, corporate, and obviously continuing to communicate strongly with citizens at large. And here, what is emphasized is that we should have scenarios that not only map risks, but also look at the trade-offs, look at the transfer of costs and benefits. What are the enablers of action? So not just thinking out into the future in terms of scenarios and projections, but looking at all the different facets of this complex future picture that we need to navigate. And the other thing which is emphasized is thinner reports. So clearly, you know, these things are massive, even multi-volume documents. So as concise as possible, an analysis of the information that's out there would be beneficial for sure. And looking at the timeline, this is for Working Group 2, but it reflects also the other working groups of the IPCC. You see how the City Special Report is coming in first in this cycle. By 2027, it should be completed. And then in parallel now, we have the process to develop the Seventh Assessment Reports of the physical climate basis, of adaptation, of risk and vulnerability, impacts, and then the mitigation options out there. And alongside the production of the assessment of adaptation-orientated information, there will be an update to an interesting document, very policy-relevant document on guidelines for assessing and informing adaptation. And all of this is gathered in a synthesis report at the end of the process in 2029. So back to the review, and just diving straight in, the idea here is to really explain what makes an effective review. Many of you probably review documents on a very regular basis. You may be reviewing academic publications or institutional reports and so on and so forth. An IPCC report is slightly different. So here I'll try to explain and articulate this. So first of all, why is it worthwhile to participate? You know that some tight author teams have been formed. Obviously, there's only a limit to how many authors can be participating directly in the drafting process. So these chapters are relatively small in terms of people effectively writing these reports. And they have an enormous gargantuan task of evaluating the increasingly growing literature base out there, including non-English literature. And at the same time, there's this expectation and it's sort of a requirement almost that the chapters are reflective of the entire body of literature and the views of the community as a whole. So by reviewing the draft, you are contributing to this process in a critical way. You're bringing your own vital expertise and your insights that can support the author's work and enable this achievement of a balanced and comprehensive assessment. So if you participate in it, what's in it for you? You are shaping the report, especially at this stage of the first order draft. You really are able to make potentially very incisive contributions that can shape and steer the way the report continues to develop. If you've never been an IPCC author or participated in the IPCC before, you get a much more in-depth insight into this assessment process. And ultimately, in the IPCC process, you expand your scientific network. One thing is that you don't have such a high workload as an author, so this is an advantage, I suppose. And if you're as shall we say, it was concrete and if you are able to identify an area which is complementary to the areas that the authors themselves bring in terms of expertise, you may be invited actually to contribute part of your knowledge as a section of the report, subsection, some text, or perhaps contributing to some figure. So you could be involved actually in the draft itself. And then expert reviewers are recognized. So you, as I've basically already said much of this before, but you can be incisive in your review comment. You could look at specific sections of the report, and all your comments and the author's responses will be made available after the publication. So it's not feeding input into an unknown whereby you don't really see what happens afterwards. You will see the result of your review. And in addition, your name and your affiliation and country of residence is published in an annex within the report. So in the final printed material, this is what you will find: an annex with all the expert reviewers are listed. In terms of when to review, when is the most incisive time to contribute? And as I said, now is really important, because at the first order draft, the report is really taking shape, whereas you have that second draft as well coming along. And if you're sort of waiting for that, thinking maybe I'll just contribute to that stage of the process, it might be more locked in, shall we say, in the direction of travel. So this is really a good time to be most effective, perhaps, in shaping the report with the author's reaction to your comments. In terms of what's effective, and you'll hear more of this from Julia and Rita, it's really important to be precise and targeted in your contribution. You need to, first of all, understand how the assessment is built. How is the report taking shape? The structure of the chapters, what the scope of the use of uncertainty languages to present the assessment findings. The figures and tables are really critical resources within the reports. So looking at these aspects can be very, very useful. And then you would be able to consider the way the assessment has been elaborated, and based on your own expertise, see if you agree, see if there are some nuances that need to be contributed, maybe some literature that wasn't necessarily taken into account. The point is, though, not to just remind people of your own publications. It's important not to just be looking for self-citation in the reports. It's really just helping the authors bear in mind new findings. Perhaps they may not have come across some of the work that's out there, particularly in other languages as well. So you could bring a lot of help in that regard. In terms of still what's effective, we would suggest not to just do editorial comments. You can imagine possibly many hundreds of people will participate in this process. And so, the authors will have a lot to contend with to work their way through systematically all these comments. So really don't worry about the editorial stuff. The reports will be copy edited anyway. So think more strategically about whether there are gaps in the chapters that the outline that was agreed by governments highlighted, and you maybe have some suggestions on how that could be addressed. You could also look across chapters. So you may have a theme in your work that is very relevant for more than one chapter. And so then you could follow this topic through and see the consistency in the assessment findings, which is really hard to achieve. I think that's a really, really useful contribution to make. And then again, looking at the way topics are spread across the chapters, are they, do you have any comments in terms of the logic of the report? Is there something that ought to be addressed in one of the chapters that is being addressed only in another one? So this cross-cutting aspect of the chapters is really interesting to look at. And when you register and you start this process, there is essentially something like this that you'll get hold of. It's a a spreadsheet to where you identify which chapter you're contributing to. You'll see that the draft you get access to on a confidential basis, and you'll have a personalized copy with a barcode. Essentially, you have to remember this is a confidential process. I could have mentioned that earlier, actually. And all the pages are numbered, all the lines are numbered, and then you become very sort of systematic in saying, well, this is relevant to this part of the chapter and this page, and so on and so forth. And then here's a snapshot of a completed review sheet after the authors have responded. And you'll see that, the comments appear, they're attributed to you, of course. And then the authors respond here on the right as a chapter team. And so they are obliged to respond to all comments. So this is, again, a call out to be very, very constructive and focused on your review comments, and very clear on what you're suggesting or what you've noticed and what your suggested solution might be. And then the authors will respond. And thanks to you being identified, they may actually reach out to you, and there may be a continuation after that. And it's important to realize, as I said, this is a very transparent process, and the review comments and responses all become public at the end. So when the report is, the SPM is approved, and the report is accepted and published publicly, at that point, you'll see on the website all the review comments, all the drafts, all the responses, of course. Then I'm just going to spend a little moment just to explain the way the assessment is phrased typically in the IPCC. So it's a use of calibrated uncertainty language. First of all, we have to remember the difference between a review and an assessment. So the review would look at the literature that's on a given topic, and it would summarize it and give an explanation of the current knowledge on a topic. The assessment takes it a step further. So obviously the review is the first step, and then the assessment goes beyond, and based on your expertise or the collective expertise of the chapter group, you'll make a statement about the confidence we have as experts on the level of understanding, on the robustness of a finding in the literature. And this is communicated with calibrated uncertainty language. The assessment, in addition to a review, is guided very much by the policy relevance of the topic. So policymakers have highlighted key issues. They want to know about this. And so you're going to really help them understand the latest knowledge and how confident we can be about what we understand. And then, as I said earlier, it's got to be neutral and not prescriptive. So the assessment isn't intended to say, here is what we know, therefore you must do this. It's intended to be neutral and just lay out the options for the audience of the IPCC reports. So here's an example. If you're looking at a range of model results in the literature, the assessment would evaluate the results together with other lines of evidence and say, well, here we have multiple reasons why we can think with confidence this will be what we'll expect to see in the next decades in terms of the model results. The review will just report the results that are out there. And that's what the authors are here for, basically. That's the whole point. They're going to be building that evidence together and then making this expert assessment. So they're not talking about their own knowledge. They're really working in a representative role for all of the community to communicate to the audience of the IPCC reports what we know and how confident we are. And here is the language that's used in a calibrated way across all IPCC reports. So there is some kind of ability to look at findings from different reports together in a consistent manner. One is a qualitative metric of confidence, which builds on the evidence that is out there and the type of agreement, how agreement is working between the findings in the literature. And here it's a balance between level of agreement and level of evidence. And there you will then come out with a confidence statement, which is highlighted in the sort of gray shading. So the more agreement and the more robust the evidence, the higher the confidence. And then there's a more quantitative approach, looking at the likelihood of outcomes. And this is quite possible to undertake with a modeling study, for example. You have many models looking at many ensembles of simulations, and you may then have a probability of certain outcomes depending on how you analyze the spread of results. But it's also based, you can be built on qualitative information. So it's not, generally the likelihood statements are used when there is a high confidence in the evidence and agreement. And then from there, you may go further and express a probability. And here you have a couple of citations where you can go and read more information about the use of this language. So the way the assessment conclusions are put together, you'll see here some examples from a summary for policymaker document, and there are various typologies of statements using this calibrated language. And it really depends on the type of findings out there in the literature, but these can also build up together to arrive at a statement of fact. So in this example, all the evidence that we have here on changes that are happening in the climate system, the authors found that the human influence on the land, on the ocean, on the atmosphere is unequivocal. So this, you see, there's no confidence language. It's a statement of fact. It's a very, very powerful language going forwards. And you remember that you might know, or you didn't know perhaps, but this summary for policymakers are approved line by line with governments. And this is a really fantastic image where you see highlighted in green text that was agreed with the governments and is gavelled down by the chair of the meeting. And in pink, you see a line that's currently being discussed, and there are issues still to be resolved, even at that stage of the process. And so this, I flagged this because it's important to see how reports are built to arrive at these concluding statements of the assessment. There has to be very, very strong traceability. And now when you start looking at these chapters, really bear in mind the traceability of the findings, how the assessment is phrased, how clear it is, because this will then be propagated all the way to a summary for policymaker document, and the assessment statements will be the basis of this final piece in the process. And so when you look at the chapters, it's very useful to see if it's clearly laid out what we've learned since the last assessments by the IPCC, why this matters, what our current understanding is, and how confident are we about our conclusions. And it's a hard process to do. This assessment takes a long time to develop and consolidate, but authors need to already be thinking in these terms now. And so you'll see some early assessment conclusions in this draft. I have here some slides, which I won't show you in detail because there's not enough time, but basically this is for you. You can have the slides after the webinar, but it shows this traceability and the building up of an assessment. Here is a chapter, a short example of a subsection of a chapter. You see in the very first paragraph, what do we know since the last assessment? And then you see a discussion of the latest evidence, what this is indicating, and finally a summary paragraph with the confidence statement. And that is the assessment itself. And this then propagates into an executive summary of the chapter, and then it makes it into the summary for policymakers, and then combining with other findings from different chapters, it'll become a summary for policymakers headline statement. And in the in the curly brackets, you see all these numbers. They reflect which chapter this information comes from. So you saw that 8.4 going all the way through this example, but you also see how it can combine with findings from other chapters to reach these conclusive assessment findings. Just to finish up, there's just a little map of different topics that really help the science policy interface work well, and it will help if you look at the review in this lens when you're looking at the draft. It's got to be very rigorous material that's drafted in the reports, and clearly communicated, a clear account of the assessment statements. The material needs to be objective. It's got to be clear what the expert judgment is based on. As I mentioned right at the beginning, focus is very important to try and reduce length of these reports and make them as incisive as possible, yet presenting all the evidence that's underpinning the statements. Figures are very important. We'll use them, all of us, very, very frequently once they've produced the reports, because they're such important communication pieces. So what is the figure saying? What's the intent? Is it clearly communicating information? Is it suitable for presentations? And then there's the co-design process is the overall handshake between the science and the policy domains is really important, this iterative co-design process. And then the review itself, obviously. And when you're looking at the report, this narrative that we build from these chapters is extremely important. And when you look back, here's the AR6, the last working group reports, and just to give you a sense of the Herculean effort. So quite tight author teams, small author teams, considering all the chapters that are contained in these reports. They come from around the world, the teams bringing different types of expertise, and look at the amount of literature that they have assessed. It's really, really quite impressive. And the review comments, it's a really substantive process that really builds these incredible resources that are the IPCC reports. So you would contribute in this way to delivering really, really groundbreaking information for the policy interface. Now we get to our report at hand. So the special report on cities and climate change. If you go and find the scoped outline of the report, and I think Agnese will probably give me a hand putting you this link directly in the chat. You can even look at it now while we talk. This is really the first step. You should go and navigate this outline and see this is what governments agreed with the scientific leadership body of the IPCC. This is what they would like to see in the report. So it's not intended to be an encyclopedia of everything to do with cities and climate change. On these targeted topics is what governments from all around the world agreed was the priority. So here you can also, don't expect to read this slide, but here you can see for yourself where your expertise can help the most. And then you see which chapter to go and look at and find the places where you can maybe make the best contribution. And again, thanks to Andrew, I have a nice set of slides that just basically gives you a quick walkthrough of the 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is really setting the scene and establishing the context of this report, why there is an issue and why do we need this information urgently on the role and on the impacts of cities and the actions that cities can make. And the critical challenge where the population is centered and yet the granularity of information makes it such a challenge to really get perspective for collective action. And then chapter 2 is about diagnosing the problem, cities in a changing climate, not only the climate change issues, but also in terms of city-specific risks and drivers, and what's currently happening in terms of adaptation and mitigation. Then in chapter 3, exploring the remedies. So what are the actions and solutions that can reduce urban risks and emissions? And then there is a very nice subsequent chapter, which is how do these remedies work? How do we ensure that these will work? So the enablers, what could be the barriers, and how to really look for synergistic approaches to make all those potential actions and solutions work. And then finally, chapter 5, as I said, cities are all over the place and very different, and we have the challenge of integrating information that's very heterogeneous into an IPCC assessment. And so here we have a really innovative chapter that tries to grapple with the city types and regions, all the nuances and the different dimensions of cities around the world. So I've given you quite a long overview of hopefully giving you some basis for which to approach the review of this report. And as I said, if these slides are for you to have as a resource, but if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A and we try and respond to them. And we also have time at the end probably to answer them a little bit more substantively. But now I wanted to invite Giulia and Rita to come in and really just take us through any items they'd like to really emphasize, any aspects of the report that they think you should be aware of as you come in as an expert reviewer, what would be most helpful, for them. And then they'll give you some messages of their own, essentially, to just to give you some guidance. So maybe Julia first, if you want to come in here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Anna, for having me here today and for this opportunity. I'm Giulia Pirani, and I work for the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And I'm here today as a lead author of Chapter 3 of the Special Report. So the chapter that deals with actions and solutions to reduce risks and emissions. So as you open our first order draft and embark on your role as reviewer, it is essential to recognize the value of constructive feedback in creating a comprehensive and balanced report. That's the ultimate aim. Now, the review process is not merely a formality. Your input is precious to us. You bring a fresh view to the content and a different perspective, perhaps. And for this, it is crucial that your comments are spot on, useful, and feasible to address. Rita will cover the do's. So, if you will, let me play the bad cop first and spend a few minutes on to outline the don'ts. First of all, I would say don't review the report disregarding its intentions and constraints. IPCC reports are not encyclopedias, but they are highly condensed assessments of scientific knowledge. And this is even more true for a special report. So while reading SRCDs, you might feel on multiple occasions the urge to comment, oh, but that's not there. And this is also an option and it should be assessed. You will have so many thoughts like this in your head. But this special report moves within tight space constraints. So with 300 pages divided into 5 chapters, and if you do the math, it's around 50 pages per chapter. We must focus on the key messages, key evidence, and key solutions that have the most important impact on cities. This has been a core dimension of our thinking and planning as we cannot afford to be exhaustive. Instead, we must exercise, both as authors and as reviewers, our expertise in being selective and targeted in our approach. So in SR cities, the knowledge that matters most is the one that matters most to cities. This is a core design criterion. Let me bring maybe the example of chapter 3, a chapter whose mission is to assess virtually any actions and solutions to reduce risks, which means all the literature on actionable measures in the domain of urban climate change adaptation and emissions. So the very same for climate change mitigation. And it all has to be condensed in 50 pages, including boxes, figures, captions, and so on. You name it. So no doubts that there will be, for instance, some space dedicated to buildings and energy supply. But what we have to ask ourselves is also how much space do we really have? So it's something in between 1.5 and 4 pages each. So this much for all that should be said on buildings and equally for energy supply. It's just an example to let you figure out what are the space constraints there. And I think that if any of us just brainstorms 5 seconds on it, already 5 to 10 actions and solutions would come to our mind. So how do we make it feasible in the space we have? By placing cities at the center of our reasoning. So, which ones of all the options that are out there would matter the most to them? So, the invitation is to be urban in your thinking and thus be selective. Think as we might have had to think back then when we drafted the first order draft. So, put yourselves in our shoes, but at the same time, help us spot key gaps. And one note also on chapter 3 versus chapter 4 in terms of content. There is a fine line between what one might define as action or solution and what would qualify instead as an enabler. So, certain actions may even be considered as instruments or enablers in order to make others feasible. So, here the invitation is to always ask yourself whether a certain item on your list would better fit in chapter 3 or chapter 4. So, here again, the invitation is to actually look back at the outline, try to understand as precisely as possible what are the boundaries across the different chapters so that then your comment is more targeted. Then, as reviewers, you should also be aware of the time and capacity constraints we are playing against. With hundreds of thousands of comments expected to come our way, while also working on the second order draft and possibly taking care of our day jobs, I'd say, it is crucial that you make your comments matter for their depth, their value, their targeted approach. Here, a warm invitation is to not generate comments through AI, because this can easily lead to a number of comments that are unfeasible to address and that might not add significant value to the report. There is no minimum number of comments to provide. You won't be tested against this. And it is your expertise that matters. So one comment might matter more than 100 when crafted with attention and expertise. And another invitation is to please inform us about key reference we might have missed, but avoid using this opportunity as a personal marketplace. So again, spot on, useful comments, feasible to address. In conclusion, please approach this task with the focus on key messages, key evidence, and key solutions that are actionable for cities. I used a lot of keywords here, so this is really for you to focus on key, actionable, and cities altogether. And be mindful of space and time constraints so that your comments live in a feasibility space. Less can be more. You can make your comments more valuable, more targeted, more expert driven, and try to share not simply requests or observations, but try to be proactive. So suggest, propose, outline solutions. So this approach will help us shape a report that will have a lasting impact on cities and climate change. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hand over to Rita now for the do's. Thanks.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. So my name is Rita Novierotto, and I'm a lead author of the Chapter 5, which title is Solution by City Types and Regions. And it provides a synthesis of actionable solutions categorized by city type, development level, climate risk, and regional context. So just a few words about the report. It is really special. It's a special report, and in my opinion, Chapter 5 is even more special, as it is going to focus on what to do and how to do it, and it will give practical examples of what have worked and what have not. So this report needs to shift from a theory of change to a theory of action. And being a reviewer of the first order draft is especially important, maybe even more than reviewing the second order draft, because this is the moment where the report is still being shaped. And at this stage, reviewers can influence not only the accuracy of the scientific context, but the framing of the key messages, the balance between the topics, and the clarity and coherence of the narrative. So reviewers are really helpful in this stage, and you have the superpowers to see the report from outside the box. We are really inside the box, so it's really important what we are going to do. So, so the first thing you need to do is to understand your role, which is what I just said. Then, very important is to read carefully the scoping document, which will help you understanding the structure, the chapter outlines, and you will have to identify the cross-cutting themes. So for example, adaptation, mitigation, equity, urban planning. So this is important, as you can understand also the topics that were decided to be included in the report and those that were not. So third, once you have given an overview of all the chapters, so you will have to identify your area of expertise, and then of course you will start do your review. And my suggestion is to first to assess the balance, try to check if multiple viewpoints and regional contexts are treated equally, equally represented, to identify gaps in evidence, as Anna already explained before. So it's really important that all the urban regions are equally represented, especially the Global South, and also the underrepresented systems needs to be there, all of them, informal settlements and so on. So look for consistency also across chapters, which is not an easy task, but it's also equally important. And the last thing I am suggesting you, which is an exercise we also have been doing, if you are not, try to think as a practitioner, as this report is addressed also to practitioners, or mainly to practitioners. So is this message clear? Is it useful? Is it accessible? This is what I feel that are the main important points you need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive perspective from both of you, Giulia and Rita. I think some of the questions that were coming into the Q&A box were also addressed, actually. We've responded to a couple directly, but I just wanted to pick up a couple. One from Fabio about what the IPCC position is on the AI use in the process. And this is a very, very topical question. So the IPCC is sort of really gearing itself into the development of a policy, a new policy. Obviously, this is an area that's been not so present in the past, but certainly is very current. And the policy is being developed. It's not available yet. There is a workshop, a formal workshop of the IPCC that's convened for February next year on the assessment methodologies and use also of broader knowledge bases, and AI will be treated in that context. So it will be interesting to see the results of that consultation. But I think Giulia made a very good point in terms of using AI to generate review comments. It's really probably not advisable because, and I mean, perhaps it's not to be excluded that it can be a helpful tool somehow to identify topics for you, where if you want to find specific gaps, your areas, where is this treated? Perhaps it helps you navigate the chapter material, much like it would in the literature out there. But we need to have that step which really brings your own expertise into why this is important for the assessment. And so I think the struggle with the AI in the context of the assessment itself is something that's still going to be grappled with for a while. How do you go from surveying and finding information and then explaining how this impacts, shall we say, the knowledge that we can transmit robustly as experts to the audience of the IPCC reports? So I go just as far as that in replying. Obviously, Giulia and Rita, feel free just to raise your hand if you want to complement any of my answers. Then I had a very interesting question addressed to me about neutrality in science. And this is, I think, a very difficult question to navigate because it opens up so many dimensions and facets to the challenge of how science is developed, funded, and pursued, whether we have a neutral scientific basis. But in actual fact, I'm not going to go into that because I think that's what we're dealing with here. It's rather the neutrality of the language used to communicate assessment conclusions. So that's as far as the comment on neutrality, and rather than prescriptiveness, in policy prescriptiveness of the IPCC assessment. So it comes down to language use. So you'll see, if you find there's language that says, very directive language, like this should be done as an outcome of the assessment, that's not what we would call a policy neutral statement. So that's worth flagging. It's more the presentation of all the options that are available to us. And then it's up to the next step, going away with this information to elaborate how this is relevant for your own policymaking context or other decision-making contexts. But thank you for that question. Then let's see. There's another really good question from Zachary about applying to be a reviewer as a group. It's not, you would have to apply as an individual expert. I didn't mention this at the time, but it's actually very, very straightforward to be considered to be an expert for the review. The requirements are very open. You need to have some demonstrable type of experience that is relevant for the topics assessed in the report. But students can apply, practitioners who don't necessarily have an academic background. There's interest even from science communicators in terms of being able to really communicate well the information, the knowledge. But I wanted to pick up on this group business. I didn't include it in the description of the review process, but in the AR6 in the past cycle, some organizations organized themselves to produce a review. So, for example, APEX, which is an early career scientist network for Arctic. I think Arctic, maybe Antarctic as well. Sorry, I don't know the acronym off the top of my head, but polar studies. They, early career scientists, decided to be structured as a network to take on some topics in the reports. This time it was the Working Group 1 report. And they worked together to consider the material and then discuss together the key points they wanted to highlight in the review, and then distribute the answers and the review comments themselves, so that each participant in the group submitted a question to the portal. So yeah, I wanted to highlight the idea of organizing group review processes. It can work also in a department or in a academic research group, particularly with early career scientists. It can be a really nice way of considering the draft it together and then elaborating the way you'd like to provide feedback. So it's not quite what you're asking, Zachary, but you just made me think of this point, which I hope might be useful for others. There was a question about the IPCC at COP. Just pick it up very quickly. There is a side event planned by the IPCC at the COP, and I've been messaging with Melinda Tignall, who's here with us. She's the head of the Working Group 2 TSU. So there is an IPCC event, and there are a couple of events in the WMO, WCRP, and IPCC Pavilion, and you don't need an invitation, but you would need access to the Blue Zone. So that's answered. Minimum prerequisite and expertise. Valentina, I think I answered this one already. It's just having relevant expertise. So yeah, it's very open because it's very hard to judge if you have a minimum prerequisite, but it's really, if you are able to engage on these topics as in the outline, then please go ahead and then you will be evaluated. And I'm pretty sure if you have some kind of expertise in the topic, you'll probably be, invited to participate, accepted. Yeah, Zachary, thanks. I'm really glad that was useful for you for thinking about early career researchers. I see Prof. Khan has mentioned whether climate funds will be reviewed. I don't have in mind the outline exactly, but maybe Julia could give me a hand, because it might be related to chapter 4, perhaps, whether finance mechanisms are being reviewed in the chapter, as far as you know. So I see your hand is up. Do you want to come in straight away?
Sure. I mean, I wanted to actually complement the answer on the use of AI. Ciao, Fabio. Good to see you here. And then I'll come back maybe to financing and the sort of solutions, actions, instruments, enablers, and the many different ways financing can actually be seen as part of this conversation. First of all, on the use of the AI, this is one exercise, if you will, where quantity doesn't matter. Really. So this is an exercise where relevance and expertise are really the leading criterion for a decision or another in the way you approach the review. Of course, the more the comments we receive, the more it would be time consuming, and it might be that AI generated comments will not be spot on. They will not add value to our process. So the invitation is also to think about the fact that we will have to reply to all the comments. So try really to be selective also on what is developed in terms of comments and in the use of artificial intelligence in this realm. And also be wary about the risks of hallucinations that we know still impact the use of most of the commercial softwares out there. So the fact is, while the IPCC forms its official position on the use of AI that Anna presented as part of Q1 2026, basically, it will be important to maybe think that if AI is needed for a reason or another in your review process, then please you make use of your own supervision. So don't leave the use of AI unsupervised. So that is really one of the key recommendations that would have to really sit in this discourse. Whether you use AI or not, it will have to be supervised. Then in terms of funding and financing, yeah, of course, this is mostly by nature a bit of Chapter 4 territory. So it will be mostly seen as an enabler. And indeed, there is already a subsection that is fully dedicated to it with the particular lens of cities, because for cities, of course, the number of instruments and opportunities that are available for financing and funding climate action is very peculiar. And it's really important that the report stresses the different opportunities that are there. And also the fact that since there are different options to choose from, then it's also about a matter of the capacity of the city to deal with the different instruments and in order to deliver what kind of action. So there is a bit of a contextualization and localization of the typical financing discourse, if you will, which I believe will be one of the most important parts of a report that wants to be actionable. So that wants to really see, even after you have identified the what and where it works, which is mostly Chapter 3 territory, then how do you make it implementable and feasible on the ground, which is more Chapter 4 territory. So these are the typical questions that you may have to ask yourself when you want to identify if and where a certain topic should sit within the special report. I don't know if I answered it all. Just let me know if there is anything that is still left pending.
No, I think that was very comprehensive. Thank you, Julia. And there was a very important question in the chat. How do we actually register to review? Could have put that on the slide somewhere. So you see, I think now a message from Agnese. There's a hyperlink directly to where you would register as an expert. Yeah, sorry for not including that, but we will put together, where we hold the recording and the slides of this presentation will include this key information, where the outline is and how to register. I don't see any other questions for now. I don't know if Rita, if you had anything you wanted to bring up. I saw you were also answering some questions in writing. Anything to flag?
No, I replied to a question about the difference between a review and assessment, but I hope it was clear.
Yeah. Okay. If anyone else would like to flag any remaining questions, please feel free to. I hope there's the starting point anyway to go in, maybe register, and then you'll receive a copy of the draft. As I said, I take the opportunity to emphasize it's a confidential process actually at this stage. So you'll be asked to sign or to click a confidentiality clause. Just to emphasize this, because as you can imagine, this information is really, really topical, but the IPCC is in the process of developing the information. So you're coming into that process. The scope is not to share this in general, because it will change, it will evolve as it keeps being refined into the next draft and then towards the final version of the report. So it's very, very premature to communicate about the current draft. So really just bear that in mind. It's very important.
Anna, I don't know if you wrote in your slides the timetable for the review
yes.
process. Okay, yes, I missed it.
I missed some really foundational important information. Yeah, so the deadline for submissions of the review comments is the 12th of December. So it's already open.
And for registering, it's the 30th of November.
Great, thank you. I didn't have that. Yeah, we'll assemble all this information on the webinar page. When can we expect the final draft publication? Do either of you remember off the top of the head when the approval plenary is scheduled for? I can look it up. I don't have it with me right in front of me at the moment. The 2027, March 2027, thank you. So that's for Mohammed. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else that anyone would like to know, or think of any questions, we can wrap up now. We can end the webinar. So the recording will be available, the slides will be available, and we'll put together a 101 of key information for you. And good luck with the review process. And then best of luck to the authors, and Julia and Rita especially, for all the work they'll be doing once the comments come in. Thank you, and have a lovely rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.